So my name is Laurens Wapenaar. I am product manager at FinDock, and today I'd like to show you what we have done for our May 22 release. This release is already in your sandbox environment, and it will be automatically pushed to your production environment Sunday night on March the 29th. And the details of this release can always be found on status.findock.com, where we start and close the release if you want to be that much on top of it. And this is basically what we should be May the 29th, not March, of course. This is what I would like to talk about. So this release, after two very, very large releases with lots of new features, we've done a bit of spring cleaning. We mostly worked on helping projects along by fixing bugs and adding minor enhancements. But there's also two things specifically I'd like to talk about, which is an exciting new pilot we're doing to improve the payment schedule performance, and enablement we're doing with our knowledge base for both partners and customers. But before we get into that, I'd like, as always, give an overview of where we are with our new features that are in a pilot phase. So last release, we released SEPA credit transfer to general availability, and that looks like it's working as expected. We're still working on go cardless instant bank payments in beta, testing with customers. If you'd like to get in on this, please let me know. But because it's in beta, it's already available in your environment. So if you would just like to try it out yourself, feel free and go ahead. And we hope that we can promote this feature to general availability with our next release. Now, like I said, we have a new pilot around payment schedule performance upgrades, but I will talk about that in detail later. So payment schedule performance, why are we working on this? So of course, payment schedules are our tool to collect payments on recurring payments or payments that have not come in through an online platform like a payment service provider and are completed directly. And the reason we are working on performance here is that while this process is running, of course, either you need to make sure that none of the data in the scope is changed, because that might lead for errors, or you need to run it at a inconvenient time in the middle of the night. And while it's running, you don't know exactly whether all your data is, whether the process is going to run correctly. Of course, you can validate your data quality beforehand with the data quality component, but it's always a bit of a way to make sure that all the files are generated correctly. So if we can reduce the time this process runs, the system can be up faster, which has less impact on business operations, and it involves basically less risk. And you get faster feedback on your collection run, and it should generally take less time of you to run payment schedules. This is primarily true for larger environments, so what we call LDV organizations. And where we are focusing our energy now is in the first steps of the payment schedule. So basically, payment schedule starts in scheduled, then it goes to generated, and by generated, I mean we have generated all the installments that we want to collect based on the recurring payments in your system. Then we process those. So for file-based payment methods like FinDock Direct Debit, this means creating a file. If it's an online payment method like credit card, this means doing callouts to the payment service provider to start collecting these payments. And once that's done, we call it processed. And if everything looks good, we can start closing the data in Salesforce. The largest part of this, at least the step that takes often the longest, is the generating of these installments, and it's also often the most critical one. And from tests, we see that this is often 40 to 50 to even 60% of the total duration of the payment schedule. So this is where we are focusing our energy now, because this is also the place where parallel processing, which is what we've implemented, works the best. I will try to give you some kind of an example. It's basically looking at the running payment schedule, but I do want to show you a bit about the impact of our changes here. So let's take this payment schedule. Let me zoom in a little bit. We've got our payment schedule path at the top. You see it's still unscheduled. No installments are attached. So basically this means this is ready to start processing, but nothing has been done yet. Now, in this environment, there are 25,000 recurring payment schedules. Of course, we have customers with 10 times more, but to keep the demo a bit within the bounds of this webinar, we've chosen to go for 25,000. Now, before our changes in this environment, this basically took 17 minutes to complete. Now, we don't want to wait for 17 minutes, but with the changes we've done, this takes often around a minute or less. So I'll start generation here. It has started, and in the meanwhile, we'll talk a bit about the performance, and then we'll come back to this once it's hopefully completed. Let me take that out. So what we've seen from tests is that if we take about 25,000 recurring payments, previously for this step, it would take about 50 minutes, and that's down to 1, sometimes even faster. And if we run about 300,000, it used to take around 2 hours for this step, which is down to about 7 minutes. So that's about a 20 times performance increase. And this is because we can generate everything in parallel now. Now, with even larger environments, we believe that the performance increase can be even bigger, or it will be at least 20 times as fast as this is now. So we've seen generate steps for very large environments take 4 or 5 hours, and we now believe that could be done in less than half an hour, which is a massive performance increase and should definitely speed up or reduce the amount of effort required for payments operations for these customers. So let's go back. So like you see here, the generation is done. Let's refresh so we can hopefully see our installments. And as you can see now, well, it says 6+, but in practice, you'll have to believe me, there are now 25,000 installments. So in less than a minute, we've now done what used to take about 17 or 20 minutes. Because this is a very important process, right? And we want to make sure before we enable this for all customers that nothing can go wrong in any situation, basically. And because every Salesforce environment is a bit unique, we are launching this in a pilot phase, which means we are testing this with a few customers to see if there are situations in where it doesn't work. And also, we want to make sure that the numbers that we're quoting on the last slide actually work like that in a basically real world environment. We've tested with our own environments, but of course in those environments there's less customization around it. So we are looking for more participants in the pilot. Of course, we'll first start in the sandbox environment to be safe, but we also hope to test this in real world production environments before we move on to the next beta open testing stage and eventually to GA. So if you are interested in running your payment schedules a lot faster, please contact either me or our support department, and they will put you in touch with me. So next is, I'd like to talk a bit about the knowledge base. So one of the things we are continuously working on is making FinDock easier to implement, which is basically an overarching theme for us at all time. And our knowledge base is one of our most important tools here, because of course payments is a complex world, and also the integration with FinDock and Salesforce requires knowledge to get through. And there are many different use cases that can be implemented with FinDock. So what we've done is, in recent times, we've created new documentation, a document around how to collect payments with FinDock. So basically, if you take the different payment methods like direct debit with FinDock, or direct debit with the payment service provider, or an online payment method like credit card or Ideal, this document tells you, at least as a high level, how these are collected with FinDock, because we get lots of questions of this from new partners, but also from customers that have just started out after they've gone live with Salesforce. The second thing is more of a partner thing. So we've written a document about migration of payment data from other systems to FinDock, because almost every project, of course, includes some kind of migration, and it needs to fit in the Salesforce with FinDock data model, but also for specific payment service providers, we need specific data, which is all in there. And the last one, a question we get a lot is, you have different ways to do direct debit with FinDock. Which one is best for me? Which one should I go for? So we've written an FAQ, which is quite extensive, about what are the different options of collecting direct debit with FinDock, and what are the pros and cons of all of them. So for instance, if you do file-based direct debit with FinDock out of the box, it's a lot cheaper, but there's some manual operations involved, like going back and forth with files. And if you do the same thing with a payment service provider, this is automated, but you get less control, and there's often additional fees involved. And these kind of things we've set aside in this FAQ. The last thing we did is, because we have a 1 month sandbox period now, in which the sandbox environments are slightly different, while based on the release can be a lot different than the production environments. We've also versioned our documentation, so you can find documentation for the sandbox release and for the sandbox environments separate from the production environments, because there's about a month where the environments, and of course FinDock in these environments, work slightly different, and sometimes different steps need to be taken to implement. And I'll briefly show how this works. So basically you can just switch from one version of the documentation to another, and if you go to docs.findock.com, we'll always end up at the current production release, but you can find documentation around the next release or things that are now working different, basically in the May 22 version. And if this sandbox version goes to production, basically we'll remove this and promote this to the production version of the docs. Okay. Then finally, our biggest task of this release was our spring cleaning. So of course, we always get lots of feedback on existing features from both customers and partners, but also projects find bugs in our system in specific scenarios, and we try to keep up with these. And sometimes we like to do a bit more of these because we want to help some specific projects along. And I'm not going to go over all of them because there's a lot. You can find all of them on our documentation websites in the release notes with detailed descriptions. But there's some I'd like to highlight. So for the API, we see more and more usage of doing payments from Salesforce communities. And because our API runs on Salesforce, it's very easy to integrate this from within the platform. So without going outside to an external endpoint and then coming back to Salesforce. So we're continuously working on this currently to smoothen this out and to find even more efficient ways to do this. So everything is fast and easy from the Salesforce environment itself, and you don't have to go out to a different API to do your payments. In this case, we found that because this is happening fast, sometimes the notification from the PSP already comes in before we've handled all the data in Salesforce, and we've made sure that this timing is now correct so that everything is handled perfectly. Second, for the processing hub, we've implemented some automated retries. We've seen that sometimes between our processing hub on Heroku, where files are created, and Salesforce, there's a timeout issue, which leads to a stuck payment schedule that basically has to be dislodged by our support department. And we are trying to continuously reduce these cases a lot, because we feel that, of course, everything should run smoothly. And even when there is a hiccup, we try to prevent situations where you have to contact us to get your collection run going again. So we've implemented some automatic retries, and we are for next release looking at more of these processes that get stuck, and see if we can solve them without having to do a manual action. So if you get stuck with your payment schedule, don't hesitate to contact us, and then we will see if there's things we can do to make this smoother. Finally, for our BACS users in the UK, if you're using our BACS out of the box feature, previously we were generating 7 character references, but we've seen that with some very, very large customers, this 7 is not enough to be unique in every single situation, especially when payments are created in very large bulks. So we are now also supporting 18 character references, which is the maximum with BACS Direct Debit. New customers will always run on 18 characters. But if you're existing customer that's running on 7 characters and you want to switch to 18 character payment references, please contact us and we can enable this in your environment. And that's about it. If you want to read about all the other bugs and enhancements we made, or want to look back at some of the things I said, there's always on our documentation site, there are the release notes that provide more information in detail. And that's it for today. Thank you for joining. I will stick around for questions that you might have. And I hope to see you for next release, where we have some exciting features planned again. Thank you. So Adrian has a question about custom payments. Let's see if I can allow you to talk very briefly.
It was simply to just ask the question. We weren't sure whether we were actually using custom payments. Is there a way of working out if we need to regression test it? That was mainly the issue.
That's a good question. Well, you shouldn't be able to have to regression test anyway, because this is the changes, even if you're using them. The easiest way to find out is there's a tab in our setup. And let me see if I can quickly find that in this environment, where you would have configured these specifically.
We didn't have the tab set up, so I assumed we weren't.
Sorry?
We didn't have it set up, so we
Okay, then you definitely should be worried. But also, if you did, so the custom payment methods are here.
Okay.
And even if you did, then this is just about making sure if you create a new one, that it ends up in your environment actually. If you're not using some very specific packages which they were dependent on, and now they're just independent of all packages, and they can work even if you use FinDock without FinDock CPA or BACS. So that was the change. So there shouldn't be any impact on your environment.
Cool. That's one less thing to test.
Right. It's always good. Okay. I don't see any further questions. If you do think of something after this call, please don't hesitate to contact me at laus@findock.com or contact our CSG department at support@findock.com. Thank you for joining, and have a nice weekend.